Selfish parents demanded that I pay my brother and his wife $500 a week, because they are a young family. I said no and cut them off, and now all family hates me. I never expected a family reunion to turn into an all-out ambush. It was right after my younger brother, Kyle, had married Emma, a sweet but very naive girl. They were only 21, fresh out of school, with no savings and big dreams. At their wedding, my parents made a big show of how much they'd support them, saying they could move in with them until they got back on their feet. I thought it was a generous offer, almost too generous, knowing my parents. But as soon as the wedding was over, things took a sharp turn. My parents started making excuses as to why Kyle and Emma couldn't stay with them. They claimed that they were too busy, that they had a lot going on, and that their house was not ready for 2 more people. It was all nonsense. I knew the truth. They didn't want to give up their comfort. What made it worse was that Emma didn't have anyone else to turn to. Both of her parents had been killed in a car accident a few years earlier, and she had no siblings. She'd been on her own ever since, working odd jobs to make ends meet until she met Kyle. I couldn't imagine how scary it must have been for her to come into our family, especially since my parents weren't exactly known for their warmth. You see, my parents had just come into a huge inheritance from my grandmother, who had died a few months earlier. Grandma had left them everything: her house, her savings, even some land she owned. They didn't waste any time selling the land and pocketing the money. I remember them bragging about how they'd waited years for this moment, as if they'd earned it. It made me sick. Grandma had worked so hard all her life, and they were treating her inheritance like a lottery jackpot. When Kyle and Emma asked to move in, my parents flatly refused. But instead of admitting their selfishness, they turned the tables on me. They called a family meeting at their house, and I went, thinking it would be about finding a solution for Kyle and Emma. Instead, it was an ambush. My dad cleared his throat dramatically and said, "You're doing fine for yourself, aren't you? You've got your business, no family of your own yet, and you're stable." I didn't like where this was going. "I'm working hard to stay stable," I replied. "Exactly," my mom chimed in, as if I'd just proven her point. "Kyle and Emma are a young family. They need help, and we've decided that you should contribute $500 a week to help support them." I froze. Did I hear that right? "Excuse me?" I asked. "You're doing better than any of us did at your age," my father said. "And since you don't have kids or a wife yet, you can afford it. It's only fair. Family supports family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kidding, right? You just got all that money from Grandma and you're asking me to pay them $500 a week? Why can't you help them?" My mom waved me off like it was a stupid question. "We have a million expenses. Besides, we've done enough. We raised you both and brought you to adulthood. Now it's your turn to help the family." The audacity of it all made my blood boil. They'd spent their whole lives sucking off Grandma's largesse, and now that they had her money, they couldn't be bothered to lift a finger for their own son. And they thought I was the answer? "No," I said firmly. "I'm not giving anyone $500 a week. I have my own expenses, and my business doesn't run itself. If you think I'm doing well, it's because I work hard, not because I have money to throw around." My father's face hardened. "So that's it? You're going to let your brother struggle because you're too cheap to help?" "Cheap?" I snapped. "You're the one sitting on Grandma's money, and you can't even let her stay with you. Don't try to guilt me into cleaning up your mess. You told Kyle and Emma they could stay with you, so why don't you keep your word instead of pawning it off on me?" The meeting ended in a shouting match, with my parents calling me selfish and ungrateful as I stormed out. I didn't speak to either of them for a week. I knew I had made the right decision, but it felt like I'd just declared war on my own family. Little did I know that was just the beginning. I spent the next week trying to put the whole thing out of my mind. I was still angry, but honestly, I was more disappointed. I shouldn't have been surprised. My parents had always been selfish, but this felt like a new low, even for them. They had everything they needed, and instead of helping Kyle and Emma, they decided to scapegoat me. Then one night, Kyle called me out of the blue. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hey, can we meet?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." I could tell he was serious, so we met at a diner near my apartment later that night. He looked exhausted, bags under his eyes, his hair a mess. Emma wasn't with him, which was unusual. "I'm sorry about the other night," he began. "I didn't know Mom and Dad were going to pull that stunt. If I had known, I wouldn't have let them drag you into it." "It's not your fault," I said. "But seriously, what's going on? They promised you could stay with them. Why aren't you there?" Kyle sighed and rubbed his neck. "They won't take us in. They told Emma and me that they're too busy and that it's time to figure things out on our own." "That's a load of crap, but what can I do? We've been couch surfing at a friend's house, but we can't stay there much longer." Hearing that made my blood boil all over again. My parents had convinced him that they would support him, only to pull the rug out from under him the moment it became inconvenient. And now Kyle and Emma were basically homeless, trying to piece their lives together. "I don't know what to do," Kyle admitted. "I'm not asking you to give us money every week. I don't want to. But," he hesitated, then continued, "I just need a little help to get started. I'm trying to start a little business. Emma's been looking for work, and I've been sewing clothes to sell online, but I want to open a shop. I have some designs ready, but I don't have the money for materials or rent." I didn't say anything at first. Part of me was still angry at how this whole situation had been dumped on me, but Kyle's tone was different than my parents'. He wasn't trying to make me feel guilty or twist my arm. He was just desperate. "How much do you need?" I finally asked. "I could start with $6,000, he said. "Enough to buy materials and cover a few months' rent for a small shop. I swear I'll pay you back as soon as I can. I just need to get this going." I could tell he meant it. Kyle wasn't like my parents. He wasn't lazy or entitled, he just needed a break. Still, I hesitated. I wasn't sure this was a good idea, and I hated the thought of enabling my parents' behavior. But Kyle wasn't asking for a handout. He had a plan, and he was willing to work for it. "Okay," I said. "I'll loan you the money. But this stays between us. Mom and Dad don't have to know." Kyle's face lit up with relief. "Thank you? Seriously, thank you. I'll make it work, I promise." I gave him the money a few days later, and true to his word, Kyle used it to rent a tiny studio space and buy supplies for his clothing line. He didn't waste a dime. Meanwhile, my parents were still running their mouths about how cheap and selfish I was. They told anyone who would listen that I'd refused to support Kyle and Emma, painting me as the family villain. Relatives began sending me passive-aggressive texts and comments on social media. "Family helps family," they'd say. "How could you turn your back on your brother?" I ignored them. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, and I certainly didn't owe my parents anything. But as much as I tried to brush it off, the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. Meanwhile, Kyle and Emma moved into a cheap studio apartment near his shop. Emma got a part-time job, and Kyle started sewing like crazy. Every time I checked on them, they seemed more determined than ever to make things work. It wasn't easy, but they were doing it. And watching them struggle made me realize I'd made the right decision. My parents could talk all they wanted, but I wasn't going to let their greed drag me down. Little did I know, that decision would change everything for all of us. Things got worse before they got better. When my parents realized I wouldn't cave into their $500 a week scheme, they doubled down on their smear campaign. Suddenly, I was the villain of every family gathering, every conversation. I didn't even have to be there. They made sure my selfishness was the centerpiece of every story they told. Relatives bought it too. My phone began to explode with judgmental texts. "A young family needs help and you can't even step up? Shameful. Your parents have done so much for you. How could you turn your back on them now? I hope one day when you need help, people will be kinder to you than you were to Kyle and Emma." It was infuriating. None of these people knew the full story, how my parents had promised to take Kyle and Emma in, only to leave them stranded. How they just inherited a fortune and yet refused to spend a penny to help. And of course, no one knew that I'd secretly given Kyle $6,000 to start his business. I could have defended myself. I could have explained everything and turned the tables on my parents, but what was the point? They'd already poisoned the well. So I kept quiet. If they wanted to make me out to be the bad guy, let them. I wasn't going to justify myself to people who didn't care about the truth. But it didn't stop there. My parents weren't satisfied with just talking, they wanted to make me pay, both figuratively and literally. They started spreading rumors at family gatherings that my business was probably failing. And that's why I was being so stingy. You know, my mother apparently told one of my aunts. He acts like he's got it all together, but I think he's struggling. That's the only reason he wouldn't help his brother. My aunt, bless her heart, actually called me to ask if I was okay. I assured her that my business was fine, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, Kyle was working nonstop. He'd rented the tiniest storefront in a not-so-great part of town, but he made it work. Emma juggled her part-time job and helped out whenever she could. I'd stop by occasionally to check in, and every time I was impressed. He'd turned the little shop into something real, rows of handmade clothes, racks of his designs, even a little corner with a sewing machine where he worked on custom orders. One night, about 3 months after he opened, I stopped in after hours. Kyle was sitting behind the counter, surrounded by sketches and scraps of fabric. He looked up as I walked in and grinned. "I sold 5 pieces today," he said. 5. I patted him on the back. "That's great, man. How's it going overall?" He leaned back in his chair, looking tired but proud. "It's slow, but it's happening. People are starting to take notice. Word's getting around." I looked around the shop, taking in all the work he'd put into it. "I'm proud of you," I said. "You're making it happen." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "I just hate how things are with the family," he said. "Mom and Dad. I don't even know what to say to them anymore. And I know they make your life hell." "Don't worry about that," I told him. "They've always been like that. You know that." "Yes, but it's not fair. They should be helping you, not tearing you down. I hate that they're dragging you into this." I shrugged it off, but his words stayed with me. He was right, it wasn't fair. But I wasn't going to let my parents' toxicity ruin what Kyle and Emma were building. What I didn't know was that my parents' next move would take things to a whole new level. They weren't content with ruining my reputation, they wanted to make sure that Kyle and Emma never forgot who they thought the real villains were. I thought my parents' pettiness had reached its peak. I was wrong. About 4 months after Kyle opened his shop, I got a phone call from him out of the blue. He sounded rattled. "Mom and Dad just stopped by the house," he said. "You won't believe what they just pulled." At first I was confused. My parents had been so hands-off with Kyle and Emma since the wedding that I didn't think they even knew where they lived. But somehow they tracked them down. "They came over like they were checking in," Kyle continued, "acting all concerned about us, asking how we were, if we needed anything. I thought maybe they'd finally come around, but then Dad just casually drops, 'So when are you going to start helping us out?' I frowned. "Help them out with what?" "Money," Kyle said flatly. "They told me they've done so much for us, and now that we're married, it's time to pay it forward." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "Pay it forward? What the hell does that mean?" Kyle's voice tightened. "They want me to give them $300 a week. Mom says it's not just for them, it's for the family, and that Emma and I have a responsibility to contribute now that they're the reason we're here." I felt my blood pressure rise. "You're kidding, right? They've hardly done anything for you since the wedding. What do they think you're contributing?" "That's the best part," Kyle said. "They think I'm just working some simple retail job or something. They don't know about the store or the sewing or anything. I didn't tell them because, honestly, I didn't want to deal with their opinions or their interference. This surprised me, but it also made sense. Kyle had kept his head down and focused on building the business. He'd probably avoided our parents as much as I had. So what did you tell them? I asked. I told them we couldn't afford it, of course. Everything we make goes straight to rent and supplies, and Emma's part-time job barely covers food. But you know how they are. They wouldn't take no for an answer. Let me guess. I said, they started guilting you. Kyle snorted. Big time. Mom went on this whole rant about how they'd sacrificed so much for us, and how they deserved to get something back. Dad just kept repeating that it's our duty as a family to step up. And when I told them no again, they brought you into it. Of course they did. I muttered. They said if you had just agreed to their plan, none of this would have been necessary. They're convinced you're the reason everything's so hard for them right now. I couldn't even be surprised anymore. My parents were predictable, if nothing else. When things didn't go their way, they always looked for someone else to blame, and apparently I was still their favorite scapegoat. So what now? I asked Kyle. They said if I didn't start helping them out, I shouldn't expect them to be there for us in the future. I let out a bitter laugh. Be there for you? They've done nothing but make your life harder since the wedding. Exactly, Kyle said. But you know how they spin things. They make it sound like we owe them our lives just because they raised us. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Don't let them bully you into anything. You're doing fine without them. Just focus on the shop and let them throw their tantrums. I know, Kyle said, although he sounded tired. I just hate how they keep dragging you into it. You don't deserve it. Don't worry about me. I told him. I've been dealing with their crap for years. I can handle it. Kyle thanked me before we hung up, but I could tell the whole situation was weighing on him. He and Emma were already stretched thin trying to make ends meet, and now they had to deal with our parents adding more stress to the mix. The part that stuck with me, though, was how clueless our parents were. They didn't know about the store, the hours Kyle was putting in, or how Emma was working to keep them afloat. They just assumed that Kyle was floating through life, and that assumption made it easy for them to ask for money. I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to escalate things. My parents weren't the type to let this go. They were about to push things even further, and I could feel a storm coming. It didn't take long for Kyle to reach his breaking point. A few days after my parents ambushed him with their ridiculous demand for money, he called me again. I can't do this anymore, he said. Emma and I talked about it last night. We're done with Mom and Dad. No more calls, no more visits, no more guilt. We're cutting them off completely. I leaned back in my chair and let the words sink in. Are you sure? That's a big step. Yeah, I'm sure, he said. They don't care about us, they've made that clear. All they do is take and take. They left us hanging when we had nowhere to go, and now that we're making it on our own, they want to swoop in and take the credit. I'm tired of them making us feel like we owe them. I couldn't argue with that. Our parents had crossed the line more times than I could count, but I also knew how vindictive they could be. You know they're going to spin this, right? I warned. Kyle sighed. Let them. I'm tired of playing their games. They can say whatever they want. I just want to focus on Emma and the store. True to form, my parents wasted no time telling anyone who would listen that their children had abandoned them. They painted us as ungrateful, selfish, and cold-hearted, conveniently omitting all the ways in which they had failed Kyle and Emma. For a while, the relatives seemed to buy it. I started getting the same passive-aggressive texts I'd been getting for months. Your poor parents, wrote one cousin. They did so much for you and Kyle. I don't know how you two sleep at night. I ignored them. By then, I'd learned not to waste my energy defending myself to people who only heard one side of the story. But as time went on, the tide began to turn. The breaking point for the rest of the family came when my parents tried to pull their usual stunts on someone else. My mother's sister, Aunt Linda, had recently sold her house and made a decent profit. Naturally, my parents saw dollar signs. They showed up at Linda's house one night, uninvited, and started hinting that they could really used some help with family expenses. But Aunt Linda wasn't like Kyle or me. She didn't hesitate to call them out. Apparently, she tore them apart right there in her living room, listing every selfish thing they'd done over the years. She brought up how they'd burned through Grandma's inheritance, how they'd refused to help Kyle and Emma, and how they'd lied to the whole family about me. By the time she finished, several other relatives had heard the story, and the truth spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the relatives who had been so quick to judge us began to reconsider their loyalty to my parents. One by one, they began to distance themselves. Family group conversations grew quieter. Invitations to events stopped coming. And my parents were left seething, unable to understand why their lies weren't working. Meanwhile, Kyle and Emma were thriving. The business grew slowly but steadily, and after about a year, they'd saved enough to move out of their cramped studio apartment into a nicer two-bedroom. Not long after, Emma gave birth to their daughter, a beautiful little girl named Lily. When Kyle called to tell me the news, I could hear the pride in his voice. "She's perfect," he said. "Emma's doing great, too. I never thought I could be so happy." I went to visit them a week later, and seeing Kyle hold his daughter for the first time was something I'll never forget. It was like all the stress, all the struggles, had been worth it. He built this life with his own hands, and now he had a family to share it with. Not long after Lily was born, Kyle started paying me back the $6,000 I'd loaned him. At first, it was small payments every few months. Then, about a year later, he showed up at my door with an envelope. "This should take care of the rest," he said, handing it to me. I opened it and saw the remaining balance, plus an extra $2,000. "What's the extra for?" I asked. Kyle smiled. "For believing in me. For helping us when no one else would. I wouldn't be here without you, man." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected him to repay me so quickly, let alone add something extra. But it wasn't just the money. It was about seeing Kyle and Emma finally succeed after all they'd been through. As for our parents, well, they're still bitter. Kyle keeps them at arm's length, only reaching out when there's big news like Lily's birth. When they do call or text, it's almost always because they need something, and Kyle is quick to shut them down. "They can't pretend like nothing happened," he once told me. "They made their choices, and I'm not going to pretend things are okay just because it's convenient for them." Our parents hate it. My mom still sends the occasional guilt trip text about how Kyle is pretending the past didn't happen, or letting it out of his life. But Kyle just shrugs it off. After all, he and Emma have built a life they can be proud of. They're raising their daughter in a happy, stable home, free from the toxic mess our parents tried to drag them into. And frankly, watching them succeed has been one of the most satisfying things I've ever experienced.